Here are the top stories for today, April 5, 2021. Help is on the way. The distribution of aid for those affected by the enhanced community quarantine in the NCR Plus area begins this week. Palace officials are hopeful that the arrival of more COVID vaccines will help boost the country's pandemic response as countries spare no effort to battle a surge in cases amid vaccine supply woes. The country has a new top judge. The palace announces the appointment of Associate Justice Alexander Gesmundo as the new top magistrate of the Supreme Court. And why farm in the city? Some women in Bulacan say, why not, as they lead mushroom growing as a livelihood amid the pandemic. Good day, I'm William Theo. Welcome to the PNA Newsroom. The Health Department is working to provide more quarantine facilities and beds to ensure that the hospitals will not be flooded with COVID-19 patients. Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergeres said they are directing the local health units to conduct triage and assess whether the patient needs to be admitted to the hospital or be sent to a quarantine facility instead.
Ang nangyayari kasi ngayon, because the public, pag nagkakasakit sila o di kaya ay na-expose, na nagkakaroon ng fear, nagkakaroon ng panic, dumidiretso agad sa ospital, which should not be the case. Kailangan may nagtatriage muna sa local governments. Yung local governments mag-a-assess yung ating mga medical officials dyan, sasabihin kung para sa ospital ba talaga ang kaso o dito ka namin kayo ilalagay dito sa quarantine facilities na meron tayo. Pangalawa, tayo ay nakakuha na ng census sa ating mga ospital, how many are asymptomatic and mild who are currently admitted in our hospitals, and we will start to extract them from the hospitals and bring them here dito sa mga naitala na natin at dinadagdagan pa sana itong mga beds from the local governments.
Meanwhile, the Food and Drug Administration confirms that Janssen Pharmaceuticals has applied for emergency use authorization for its Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine. If granted, it will be the 5th vaccine manufacturer in the country to get regulatory approval.
4 pa rin ang merong EUA sa atin, ang Pfizer, Sinovac, AstraZeneca, and Gamaleya or the Sputnik V. Meron ho tayong recent application ngayon, yun pong sa Janssen, yung J&J. So yan pa lang, wala pa hong iba tayo na approve for now.
Judiciary personnel are now among priority sectors for COVID-19 vaccination. Acting Chief Justice Estela Perlas Bernabe made this announcement in a notice to court workers today. This after the National Task Force Against COVID-19 approved the Supreme Court's request for the inclusion of judiciary workers in the A4 category of the vaccination priority listing. This category covers frontline personnel in essential sectors, including uniformed personnel and those in working sectors identified by the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases as essential under the Enhanced Community Quarantine. Perlas Bernabe said these include justices, judges, and court personnel who ensure justice is dispensed even during the pandemic. She said the details of the measure's implementation shall be immediately worked out and is set to benefit over 300,000 members of the judiciary. Aid is on the way for almost 23 million individuals affected by the enhanced community quarantine in Metro Manila and 4 neighboring provinces. This as local government units in these areas will receive funds for the one-time aid this week. In a Laging Handa briefing, Department of Social Welfare and Development spokesperson Irene Dumlao said the aid distribution can start as early as Tuesday once the Bureau of the Treasury releases the funds to the LGUs. Under the DSWD and the Department of the Interior and Local Government's Joint Memorandum Circular Number 1 released on March 31, each qualified individual will receive 1,000 pesos while a family will receive a maximum of 4,000 pesos. Local government units will determine whether the aid will be given in cash or in kind. Mayors would have to issue an executive order indicating the method through which the aid will be distributed to the beneficiaries. Among those included as priority beneficiaries are low-income individuals, informal economy workers who earlier benefited from the Social Amelioration Program or SAP, those belonging to vulnerable groups, persons with disability, solo parents, among others. The National Capital Region and the provinces of Bulacan, Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal will remain under Enhanced Community Quarantine or ECQ for one more week until April 11. Voter registration in areas under the Enhanced Community Quarantine will remain suspended. This as offices of the Commission on Elections or COMELEC in these areas are still closed from April 5 to 11. COMELEC spokesperson James Jimenez says these offices include the Office for Overseas Voting at the poll body's main office and all offices of the election officer. Also suspended is the issuance of voter certification. Meanwhile, voter registration in COMELEC offices in other areas will resume and is set Monday to Thursday only from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Courts also remain physically closed in ECQ areas. Over the weekend, Acting Chief Justice Estela Perlas Bernabe also said hearings except for urgent matters from April 5 to 11 are suspended. The filing periods of pleadings and other court submissions that fell from March 29 to April 11 shall also be extended for 7 calendar days. Chief Presidential Legal Counsel Salvador Panelo is optimistic that the country's pandemic response will get a boost with the expected arrival of more COVID-19 vaccine doses. In his online commentary show Counterpoint, Panelo appealed to the public to wait for the bulk of COVID-19 vaccines, which are currently affected by global supply issues. He also hoped that the country's gross domestic product would return to pre-pandemic levels after most of the country's population would have gotten vaccinated. Panelo also reminded the public to continue observing quarantine protocols such as wearing of face masks, face shields, hand washing, and physical distancing even after getting vaccinated. Meanwhile, Communications Secretary Martin Andanar said the challenges in the procurement and rollout of COVID-19 vaccines is a global issue and not incompetence as alleged by some members of the opposition. This after some senators continued to blame the Duterte administration's supposed incompetence for delays in the procurement and rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. Andanar cited the insights of Prashant Yadav, senior fellow at the Center for Global Development in BBC's weekly podcast called How to Vaccinate the World. Yadav says high-income countries have not done enough to increase supplies going to developing countries. To speed up COVID-19 vaccine production, Yadav emphasized the need for vaccine manufacturers to deploy teams to transfer vaccine expertise to different sites, look for additional sites without compromising other products they are manufacturing, and ensure other ingredients needed by vaccine suppliers do not become constraints. An employee of the Presidential Broadcast Staff Radio Television Malacanang or PBS-RTVM received his first COVID-19 vaccine in Manila. The employee was identified as Leopoldo Lubid Jr. He said he was among those who registered online for Manila's vaccination rollout on March 29 and got his first dose of Sinovac vaccine yesterday, April 4. Lubid said he did not experience any adverse effects about getting inoculated with Sinovac. Lubid falls under the A3 category or persons with comorbidities under the vaccine priority list identified by the Department of Health and the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases. The city of Manila vaccinates 450 people per day. Still to come, more healthcare workers from the Visayas will help augment COVID-19 response of areas in the NCR+. And the Army condemns the NPA's ambush that killed 2 soldiers in Negros Occidental. More on these when the PNA Newsroom continues.
Alamin kung paano ang tamang pagsusuot ng surgical mask. Una, hawakan ang mask sa strap at siguruhing natatakpan nito ang inyong bibig at ilong. Tandaan, ang may kulay na bahagi ng mask ang dapat nasa labas. Ito lamang ang tamang paraan ng pagsuot nito. Ihulma ang nose piece o maliit na metallic strip ayon sa hugis ng inyong ilong. Iwasan ang paghawak sa inyong ilong at bibig. Kung marumi na ang mask, hubarin ito gamit ang strap at itapon ito sa isang basurahan. Siguruhin ang maayos na paghuhugas ng kamay gamit ang sabon at tubig. Ang surgical mask ay dapat gamitin ng mga pasyenteng may sakit sa baga o mga taong mayroong ubo, sipon at lagnat, mga nag-aalaga sa mga may sakit, at mga healthcare at frontline workers. Maaari ring magsuot nito kung kayo ay pupunta sa matataong lugar. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
Volunteer healthcare workers from the Visayas will be deployed to hospitals and other medical facilities in the National Capital Region and other provinces that are under Enhanced Community Quarantine or ECQ. Senator Christopher Lawrence Bongo initiated the move to help augment the number of healthcare workers as the number of COVID-19 cases surge in the region. Go, through the Office of the Presidential Assistance for the Visayas, sought the assistance of DOH regional offices, local government units, and Malasakit Center hospitals and Project Balikbuhay private hospital members to implement the initiative. The recipient hospitals will shoulder the accommodation, food, and transportation needs of the frontliners once they arrive in Metro Manila, while the Zero Pay or the DOH Regional Center will shoulder their transfer from any point in Visayas to NCR. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana said the continued presence of Chinese maritime militia ships in the West Philippine Sea showed China's intention to occupy other features in the area. Lorenzana was responding to the statement of the Chinese embassy justifying the presence of Chinese vessels off Julian Felipe Reef. He said China has done this before at Panatag Shoal or Bajo de Masinloc and at Panganiban Reef, brazenly violating Philippine sovereignty and sovereign rights under international law. He also said that the utter disregard by the Chinese embassy in Manila of international law, especially the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea or UNCLOS, is appalling, and that the Philippines' claims stand on solid ground while China's does not. The National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea earlier expressed concern about a Philippine Coast Guard report that around 220 Chinese fishing vessels believed to be manned by Chinese maritime militia personnel were sighted in line formation at the Julian Felipe Reef on March 7. And it's official, the Philippines has a new Chief Justice. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque confirmed that President Rodrigo Duterte has picked Associate Justice Alexander Gesmundo as the new top magistrate of the Supreme Court. Gesmundo replaced Chief Justice Diosdado Peralta, who availed of optional retirement upon turning 69 on March 27. Prior to his appointment in the SC in 2017, Gesmundo served as a magistrate of the Sandigan Bayan. He is the fourth top magistrate to be picked by Duterte and will serve until November 6, 2026. Other magistrates who have applied for the post were Senior Associate Justice Estela Perlas Bernabe and Associate Justice Ramon Paul Hernando. The Army has condemned the killing of 2 soldiers in Negros Occidental last Saturday, as well as several other atrocities by suspected communist terror groups. Marita Moahe has the story.
2 intelligence operatives of the Philippine Army's 15th Infantry Battalion died in an ambush by suspected communist terrorists in Meycauayan, Negros Occidental on Saturday. Police said that Private First Class Alastair Balboa and Corporal Joem Megilio were fired upon by some 30 fully armed communist terrorists after visiting community support program teams in Sitio Luoy. The 2 were not in combat mode and were in civilian attire when they were ambushed. Major Zenon Pancito III of the 3rd Infantry Division condemned what he described as a cowardly and deceptive act of the CPP-NPA. Another Army official in Leyte condemned the CPP-NPA, citing its lack of respect for human life. Brigadier General Zosimo Oliveros, commander of the 802nd Infantry Brigade, made this statement after authorities exhumed the cadaver of NPA leader Eliazar Sabidalas in Barangay Caghalo, Carigara. Former rebels claimed Sabidalas died after being abandoned by his comrades in an encounter with military on July 18, 2015. Oliveros said that terrorist communists deliberately hide the experiences of its members from their families to prevent demoralization on its ranks. Meanwhile, government troops condemned a terroristic attack that happened amid the observance of the Holy Week in ALBAY. 2 civilians, including a minor, were badly hurt after members of the CPP-NPA detonated an anti-personnel mine in Barangay Alyang, Ligao City, Albay on Black Saturday morning. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Tapnio, commander of the 49th Infantry Battalion, denounced the CTG for carrying out another ruthless act endangering the lives of civilians. The Joint Task Force Bicolandia under Army Major General Henry Robinson Jr. also strongly condemned the attack. For the PNA Newsroom, I'm Marita Muaje.
In our business news, the National Transmission Corporation, or TRANSCO, has the highest dividend contributions to the national treasury among government-owned and controlled corporations for the first quarter of the year. The GOCC, under the Department of Energy, said it has remitted 8.32 billion pesos to the national treasury from January to March 2021. Melvin Matibag, President and Chief Executive Officer of TRANSCO, also said the GOCC has realigned its budget to support the national government's COVID-19 response. TRANSCO said it is also committed to remit 1.6 billion pesos in the coming months. DOE Secretary Alfonso Cusi has lauded the contributions of TRANSCO in the national government's fight against COVID-19 and in its Build, Build, Build program. Under Republic Act 7656, GOCCs are required to remit 50% of their net income to the National Treasury. The Basis Conversion and Development Authority is closer towards the completion of its 3 billion peso plan to relocate and modernize the housing and support facilities of the Philippine Air Force. The Air Force facilities will be relocated to a 65-hectare site in New Clark City. BCDA is also in the process of preparing the detailed design of the new PAF facilities. BCDA President and Chief Executive Officer Vince Dizon said they are actively engaging with the Air Force to ensure that the new facilities comply with their requirements. He said BCDA will always look for ways to transform former military bases and properties into premier centers of economic growth. In August 2019, Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana and Dizon signed a memorandum of agreement for the relocation of the Air Force housing and operational areas to Clark. Up next, a Stone Kingdom paying tribute to Igorot culture is poised to become Baguio's next tourist attraction. And a sprouting livelihood helps women of Meycauayan City in Bulacan survive the pandemic. The PNA Newsroom returns after these reminders.
Alamin ang tamang paraan ng pag-ubo upang mapigilan ang paglaganap ng Coronavirus Disease 2019. Ugaliing magdala ng panyo o tissue. Kung uubo o babahing, takpan ang buong ilong at bibig gamit ang panyo o tissue. Kung walang dalang panyo o tissue, maaaring gamitin ang braso na pantakip. Kung nakararamdam na kailangan umubo o bumahing, agad na dumistansya sa mga tao sa paligid. Huwag dumura kung saan-saan, gumamit ng tissue at itapon sa basurahan. Ugaliin ang paghuhugas ng kamay at paggamit ng alcohol o hand sanitizer upang mamatay ang mikrobyo. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
Despite the continued rise in the number of COVID-19 cases in the Philippines, the death or fatality rate is only at 1.8%. DOH Technical Advisory Group member Dr. Edsel Salvania said, out of the top 30 countries with the highest number of cases, the country's number of deaths of 13,000 is second to Israel, which is in the last place. In terms of death per million population, the Philippines is at 119th or less than 1/10 than that of the United States, the UK, France, Spain, and Italy. Considering this data, Salvania said Filipino doctors and healthcare staff are better than world-class. DOH Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere meanwhile said the number of deaths in the Philippines is below the global average of 2.2% case fatality rate. Vergere noted that a country's pandemic response would still depend on its health system and the capacity of its government. And in sports, chess titans from Laguna made history on Saturday night. They became the first ever champions of the Professional Chess Association of the Philippines, or PCAP. In a rare sporting event during the Holy Week, Laguna clinched the All-Filipino Conference title after beating the Camarines Soaring Eagles in the Grand Finals. The Heroes, led by their Grandmaster duo of Board 1 player Banjo Barcenilia and homegrown talent John Paul Gomez, was on pace after taking set 1. But the GM Mark Paragua-powered Soaring Eagles bounced back in set 2, sending their championship battle to the Armageddon matches. FIDE Master AJ Literatos eventually settled a tiebreaker against Elan Asuela to hand the Heroes the championship. Up next for PCAP is its reinforced conference, which will be called the Wesley So Cup in honor of the Filipino-American Super GM. Before this, an all-time star game will be played in May. The Philippines and the Department of Tourism have secured positions as nominees to the 2021 World Travel Awards. The award-giving body aims to acknowledge, reward, and celebrate excellence in the travel, tourism, and hospitality industries. The Philippines is nominated as Asia's leading beach destination and Asia's leading dive destination. On the other hand, the DOT is shortlisted as Asia's leading tourism board. At the same time, Cebu lists as one of the nominees under the Asia's leading wedding destination category. Intramuros, which bagged the 2020 leading tourist attraction citation for both the World and Asia categories of the WTA, is also automatically nominated for the same award this year. Tourism Secretary Bernadette Romulo Puyat said they hope to maintain the country's image as a top-of-mind destination through the help of notable platforms such as WTA. The 2021 WTA online voting period for Asia is from March 30 to August 16. As Baguio props up its tourism amidst a less strict quarantine, a new tourist destination that tells about Igorot folklore and showcases the locals' rock-laying skills will be opened in the city by mid-year. The so-called Stone Kingdom along Long Road, Pinsao proper, is its final touches. The park highlights the Igorot ingenuity in creating stone walls similar to the rice terraces in Batad, Banawe. Also among the main attractions is a tower that depicts the story of Gatan and Bangan, an Igorot man and woman who survived the Great Holocaust. Owner Pio Velasco said the park was conceptualized when the community quarantine was declared in March 2020. He said the park represents the blend of old and modern culture and the values of the Igorots. He hopes to complete the park in 2 months and open it to the public by June. As the pandemic continues to affect jobs and livelihood, people are finding alternative ways to make ends meet. In Bulacan, women are growing mushrooms as a potential source of income during the pandemic. The Mushroom House in Meycauayan City is a project by the local government and supported by several residents. The growers also make their own fruiting bag where the mother mushroom or its first mushroom sprouts. Mushroom harvests are being sold for 80 pesos per 250-gram bag. Meycauayan City Mayor Linabel Ruth Villarica launched the Mushroom House in November 2020 with members of Samahan ng Kababaihan ng Meycauayan. Villarica said the local government aims to extend its project to solo parents, persons with disability, and the Soroptimist International of Meycauayan. She added urban farming is a good venture as people stay at home to contain the spread of the coronavirus. Here's another look at today's biggest stories. Help is on the way. The distribution of aid for those affected by the enhanced community quarantine in the NCR Plus area begins this week. Palace officials are hopeful that the arrival of more COVID vaccines will help boost the country's pandemic response as countries spare no effort to battle a surge in cases amid vaccine supply woes. The country has a new top judge. The palace announces the appointment of Associate Justice Alexander Gesmundo as the new top magistrate of the Supreme Court. And why farm in the city? Some women in Bulacan say, why not, as they lead mushroom growing as a livelihood amid the pandemic. Thank you for watching another episode of the PNA Newsroom. To check more news content, visit our webpage or head on to the Philippine News Agency's Facebook and Twitter accounts. For more stories about the government and how it serves Filipinos, look for these hashtags in all of our social media platforms and websites. We are shown on the pages of the PCOO and its attached agencies. Also watch us on television on PTV4 and IBC 13. And that's your daily dose of the biggest stories that you need to know. From the PNA Newsroom, we tell stories that inspire change. I am William Theo. Good day.